Hertz Global, they put out some numbers that beat Wall Street's estimates. Six Flags, their shares are down as the water park operator reported revenue for the quarter that missed estimates. Let's break it down with Jody Lurie. She's a senior credit analyst at Bloomberg Intelligence. She follows all these leisure companies. Jody, let's first start with Hertz, because I am a gold member at Hertz Global.
And proud of it.
I'm proud of it, yes. What's going on at Hertz, Jody?
I mean, those are the priorities, Paul. So the thing that's interesting about Hertz is that they were very optimistic on their call. They talked about franchising as the next new endeavor, next big thing, how it was going to really help the company sort of get better margins and be similar to how the hotels do franchising or asset-light models. But what's so interesting about it is when you set the bar so low on a company, it's very easy to beat expectations. We, a few weeks ago, wrote a few pieces on the company that were less positive in terms of just the path forward to liquidity and to the ability to sort of execute on this turnaround that they're doing.
So talk a little bit about the unusual way that they're going to achieve this turnaround, because they had a debt raise, but they also sold shares that allow people to short it. I didn't quite understand it, but
yeah.
Bottom line, they needed money.
Right, Scarlett. It was not the most attractive of situations. It basically pushed unsecured holders down further in the capital structure. And it's a convertible note that is senior and then also had that ability that people could hedge or they could short it. They weren't actually receiving any of the proceeds from issuing additional shares. They only received a nominal amount of money from the banks that did the offering. And so that was one of those situations that you kind of scratch your head and you say, okay, about a year ago, the company's equity actually did really well because you had a few activists involved in the company. And at that time, they could have, in theory, issued equity and gotten some money for it. Here, they were doing it for free. Now, what's sort of interesting about Hertz is that they've done a few senior convertible bond offerings over the past year and a half, 2 years, and the capital structure is just ugly. It's not one that makes you write home to mom about.
So I'm looking at the capital structure, and it's definitely ugly. So, and there's really no cash flow, no EBITDA here. They used to crank out $3-4 billion of EBITDA per year. And now it's just a couple hundred. What happened?
What didn't happen, Paul? So in 2022, we sort of said that 2022 was the best it was going to be for both Hertz and Avis, and they hit peaks in terms of EBITDA generation. And that was a combination of coming off of the pandemic, of people revenge spending, of them being able to access used vehicles at such a rate that was more attractive, and also they had significantly reduced their fleets at an attractive rate, and Hertz had come back from restructuring. Now, after 2022, they both said, oh, let's give some money back to shareholders by way of buybacks. And after that, it's gotten worse and worse. Now, Hertz, of course, had a couple of hiccups. They've definitely been a little bit more experimental than Avis in terms of what they've tried to do to right-side the business or attract customers, attract investors. One of them was when they bought into Tesla and EVs, and they didn't understand that if you're visiting a national park in Wyoming, you're not necessarily comfortable having a Tesla.
Right.
So having a lot of Teslas in your fleet might not necessarily sit nicely with people. And so you had that. Now, fast forward, they're well past that. But they brought in a new CEO in probably what you would say is the 11th hour of needing this help. And while they guide for positive EBITDA this year, I would sort of argue that the path to get there is a little bit tenuous, particularly when they're dealing with auto recalls, when they're dealing with just these sort of hiccups that are unexpected.
Yeah. I know a lot of people who actually bought used Teslas from Hertz because they needed to get rid of or trim down their fleet. Jody, before we let you go, we got to ask you about Six Flags, the amusement park company, the water park operator. They reported results. The stock is down 18%. What are you looking at from a credit perspective?
So, Scarlett, what's so interesting about Six Flags is it definitely struck a little bit more positive tone in my view. when you look at the company on a same park basis, by that we mean is that they got rid of 8 parks, so they sold 7 and they closed 1 last year. And so stripping out those parks that aren't operating, it actually was relatively positive. Now, there are caveats to that. For instance, the adjusted EBITDA numbers, they had a lot of non-cash buybacks or non-cash add-ins that somehow appeared out of nowhere that they didn't have last year. And so you say, okay, were those just sitting there and they were waiting for a time to kind of plug them in? I'm not quite sure, but I think more importantly, they, they're at a time when they can sort of see a path forward. But I think the expectation is that with the Canada wildfires, with consumer health being a little bit rocky, that the sort of positives that we saw in second quarter might not necessarily be sustainable. But from a liquidity perspective, they did buy some additional time with their debt issuance earlier this year, and with the fact that they're able to meet their Georgia Park put payment, which comes due in a year, or in January, I should say. So there are some bright spots to it, but I think it's really early stages. And so as a credit analyst, I still can't sit comfortably with the name, but I do see a scenario when they could get there. Now, 4 times net leverage target is a little bit far-fetched, something we've heard before from prior management and not something we see anytime soon.
Jody, thanks so much for joining us. Appreciate it. As always, Jody Lurie, she's senior credit analyst for Bloomberg Intelligence, getting a few minutes of her time here on some of these leisure names.